Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I greatly appreciate you being with us today. With these podcasts, as you know, we hope to explore issues that touch us and our families in light of the revolution in longevity that it's reshaping our Jewish world. And we appreciate very much your support. You can follow us and listen to previous podcasts by going to our website, jewishsacredaging.com, and liking us on the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. And with no further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning a colleague and friend, Rabbi Vicki Axe. Hi, Vicki. How you doing?
I'm okay, thanks. These
Good.
are interesting times.
That puts it mildly. Yes. Vicki has agreed to join us today to talk about something very personal and something that, again, one of these issues that perhaps isn't discussed enough. But with the aging of the baby boomers and hosts of other things, and we want to talk a little bit about, well, actually, we want to talk a lot about what is called frontotemporal degeneration, or in the initials FTD. Vicki, talk to me about what this means to you and your journey in this disease.
So about 10 years ago, my husband Harold started having trouble speaking. And I noticed it that he would have garbled words where I had to ask him to repeat, couldn't quite understand what he was saying. And after about a year, I didn't say anything to him. After about a year, he said, "There's something happening with my speech." And I told him I was so relieved that he said that because I had noticed it. And we went to neurologists who diagnosed him with primary progressive aphasia. PPA, and that was the only actual manifestation of what we learned later was FTD that we noticed. He was a physician, and as his speech became, as it progressed, ultimately he couldn't speak for the last about 4 years of his life. Not to jump ahead, but he did die this past April. And but he continued seeing his patients by writing on his iPhone, and he was an allergist. So there was a commonality to his patients, so that he could have a lot of prepared papers for them explaining what they were going through and what the treatment was, and so on and so on. So as it progressed, I happened on an article, I must have been Googling around, that was written by two physicians doing research on PPA, on primary progressive aphasia. One out of the Mayo Clinic and one from Johns Hopkins. And I reached out to both of them separately, told Harold's story, and they both responded immediately. They were intrigued and interested. And we ended up going to the Mayo Clinic, and he became a research subject for them at the Mayo Clinic. We ended up going there 4 times. And the physician there said that, yes, he has primary progressive aphasia, but he further diagnosed it as apraxia of speech. And he described as FTD is a function of the frontotemporal part of the brain and a part of the brain called the tau, whatever, and explained to us that there's absolutely nothing that can be done for it, and that people with FTD live about 5 years, He had already, by the time we went there in 2016 for the first time, he had already been struggling with his speech for a good 5 years or so. And so to hear that patients on an average live with the disease for 5 years was a little upsetting to me. Our 4 boys, and 2 of them are married, and the 2 wives, and I noticed other things happening, which are typical and demonstrate FTD. A person can be very high functioning, which he was. He continued to practice medicine, but his judgment was beginning to change. We saw it in his driving, and we saw it in how he managed our financial affairs, and it affects your judgment and executive functioning. Unlike Alzheimer's, it's not, which is further back in the brain, it doesn't affect memory. And so, as I say, he was high functional. He was practicing medicine until June of 2018, when earlier that year we took away his keys to his car, and that's a hard one, because driving is a part of a person's personality, and so that was tough. And there were times when he got in the car to drive, and I had to physically stand in front of the car so he wouldn't go. And then we decided it was time for him to retire. And that was June of 2018. And interestingly, we had a retirement party for him, and his patients came, and they were sobbing because, as an allergist, they all said that he had changed their lives. So that they could do sports and have their pets in their apartments, and that he had given them a quality of life with the work he did. They adored him. And anyone who spoke about Harold, colleagues, friends, family alike, always spoke about the twinkle in his eye. And even when he couldn't speak, in his phone, he had responses, not only for his patients, but he had ready jokes. And one would think that he wasn't engaged, but if he was hearing a conversation, he would go find the joke that was exactly on point. And he had, when we went to Shabbat services, which he came to with me, he came to everything with me. He had already in his phone Shabbat Shalom in Hebrew and English ready to pop up at the Oneg. So he was still very engaged, but he was losing his cognitive functioning.
Right.
And so he insisted that he retire. That was June of 2018, and over the summer I realized that I really needed to become his full-time caregiver.
So Vicki, this FTD, when did you notice, or what age did you notice Harold beginning to exhibit these symptoms? Because sometimes, we hear now a lot about early onset Alzheimer's and people in their 40s or 50s beginning to see. Is there a range within the onset of this disease that one can, look for?
Yes, this is a very tragic disease because it affects very young people. It can affect a person, men and women alike, as young as 21. Anytime. Wow. I actually looked up in anticipation of our conversation. Anytime between the age of 21 and 80, and the majority of cases have onset between 45 and 64, well before you see Alzheimer's. Harold was in his mid-60s when we began to hear the change in his speech. So it could be that he had it prior to that.
And is there a genetic test for this, or is there any kind of test, or you have to wait until symptoms appear?
You have to wait until symptoms appear, and it can be genetic. However, thank God he was tested at the Mayo Clinic, and his blood revealed that in his case, it's not genetic. It's random, and so that gives me a sense of hope that it's not going to happen to my children.
Now, with many of these diseases, there's a national organization. There is one for FTD, is there not?
Yes, and again, Googling around, I found the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration, AFTD, and it became my Bible. It's so expansive. They have sections for the patient to read, for the caregiver to read, for children of FTD, for the medical community, for the research community. And in the caregivers section, which was just endless support, they have lists of groups, that support groups, either on the phone or in-person groups by region, by state. It is so comprehensive, and as I say, became my Bible. And one of the things that it recommended, not to jump ahead to my role as caregiver, was 2 closed groups on Facebook, which became my support system. One was for family of FTD patients, and the other was specifically for spouses of FTD, where people shared their daily occurrences that you couldn't share with anyone. It's a horrible disease, and there are things that happen that are hard to articulate or describe, and that people who aren't going through it don't necessarily relate to or even want to hear.
The Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration, they have a website. You can go to info, I-N-F-O, at theaftd.org. That's info at theaftd.org. And if you go to the great God Google and Google this, there is even a helpline, which is obviously very, very powerful. And that's 866-507-7222. That's 866-507-7222. And hopefully we'll put that up on the screen. But again, you can Google AFTD, the Association for Fronto, F-R-O-N-T-O, Temporal Degeneration. Let's go to that, because there are people who listen to this and who are caregivers, and it's such an exploding life stage now, and it is a new life stage. When we do the Art of Caregiving workshop, we start off with saying this is really a brand new life stage in America, especially with the longevity revolution, with so many people living longer, and the fact that now even first stage baby boomers who may be in their 70s, some of them who are still caring for parents, perhaps, how much the more so with spouses and or children or grandchildren. So it's a multi-generational issue. Talk to me a little bit about when you just alluded to this before, when you knew that you were entering this new life stage of Harold's caregiver. How did you begin to judge that, manage that? Were you still with your congregation at that time? You're juggling so many different things. How did you begin to navigate this minefield?
So the summer of 2018, he had retired June of 2018, and over the summer, a few things happened which made me understand that he needed me to become his full-time caregiver. He used to come to everything. He was the wind beneath my wings, and came to everything I did, every service, every baby naming, every wedding, every funeral. He was always with me, always, always, always. He had a black pen at every wedding for signing the ketubah and so on and so on and so on. So I went to a wedding. I was doing a wedding, officiating a wedding. And as I always did, said, I'm going to go find the couple and look at the space. And it usually took me about 20 minutes. And when I came back 20 minutes, I couldn't find Harold anywhere. And my heart's pounding while I'm telling you this story. And I finally found him with the people from the hotel who had called 911 because he had gone to the restroom, couldn't button his pants because they had become tight on him, and was walking around with his pants open and his zipper down to look for me. And that's when I knew I couldn't bring him to any events ever again, and that he needed full-time care. So I met with my congregation and explained to them that this is where we were, and that my plan was to step down. This was in July, to step down immediately after High Holy Days. And we met at someone's home. We were a small congregation, and the chairs were set up in a circle. And when Harold went to sit down, he missed the chair and landed on the floor. And I asked him that night, and he still had a wonderful sense of humor. When we got home, I said, "Did you do that on purpose so they would understand why I need to step down?" But that was typical, the lack of judgment. Visually, it affects your vision and spatial relations and so on and so on. So I continued. No, I stepped down immediately after High Holy Days, and during that time, I looked for a place for us to move so that we could be in a one-level place. This is an interesting point. We were living in Connecticut and learned from an elder care attorney as well as elder care social workers that services for the elderly vary from state to state, and that the services in New York State are better than Connecticut. So I pivoted my search from Connecticut to be near where we had lived for many years to New York State, and found a lovely apartment. So part of caregiving is taking care of your loved one, Harold, and at the same time navigating the system to get the services that he needed through, he already had Medicare, but to get the Medicaid services that he needed as a disabled person. And that was a full-time job in and of itself. In navigating all of the things that needed to be done, becoming his POA, his what's that called? That my signature was the same as his, and thank you, power of attorney. All of the administrative things involved in taking care of him, finding daycare for him, which I did. Which at the outset I paid for out of pocket, and then when Medicaid kicked in, it was covered by Medicaid. And so all of those things, I likened it to the game of whack-a-mole. As soon as you feel like you got something done and you feel great, something else pops up, and it was never ending. It was relentless in those administrative things that needed to be cared for, taken care of, at the same time caring for Harold. And until Medicaid kicked in to cover expenses of his care, I was with him full time. And as his as the disease progressed, as the deterioration progressed, I ultimately needed to shower him, brush his teeth, toilet him. It happened quite fast once we moved. The deterioration of his motor skills, which is also part of FTD, which is actually called PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, which makes me take a time out to say that we were lucky, but I know many people with the symptoms go to a neurologist or their doctor, or go to and specialists, and it's not a known disease, and it gets misdiagnosed and treated for other diseases. And in some cases, I believe I'm saying truth here, in some cases are given medicines that are detrimental to FTD. We were very lucky because as we were cared for, we first of all understood there was nothing that could be done for it except to just care for him and give him the best quality of life possible. Another piece of the progression was that we were married almost 49 years it would have been in September. And our life was filled with wonderful things. We loved to go to the theater, and we loved to go travel, and it was all him. He was this genius travel planner, and we loved to go for car rides, and he was a pilot and a private pilot, and go for plane rides and go have lunch on Martha's Vineyard just because. And that last year that we lived in, my first year having stepped down, I would get theater tickets or plan. He loved upscale restaurants, and those were his joys, and that brought out the twinkle in his eyes that I spoke about. And it was gone. We would see a theater piece, and I would be bubbling with excitement to talk about the moments in it and the choreography and the costumes, and I had no one left to talk to. So that's part of caregiving, especially with FTD, that you lose your spouse. I was no longer a wife. I was the person who just took care of his daily needs as his world became smaller and smaller and smaller. He as it progressed, he became like a toddler in being very egocentric and a toddler that wasn't going to learn, develop as a toddler does. So things like if we were in a parking lot, you teach a toddler to walk near the cars because they're active cars. Well, he would walk in the middle of the parking lot, and no matter how many times I said, come close to me, come over here, it just didn't generate understanding. He did things like if we were driving somewhere, he would just get the notion to get out of the car while we were driving on a highway and go to open his door, to the point that I had him sit in the back of the car, the back seat, so that I could childproof the door.
Vicki, as a caregiver, before we start running out of time, just where did you go for support? Because there are people who are walking this walk and are feeling it's all me, I'm alone. Yes, there's a national organization, but day to day, you're just right, day to day, it's up to me. Where did you go for that sense of respite and for your soul? Where did you go?
So it's a multi-layered question. First of all, I'm very lucky because I have 4 sons who are wonderful. And I know from reading on the closed Facebook group that some people don't have family support, that their family is not there for them, and on the other hand, mine was. And the 2 Facebook groups were extremely helpful. I also go to a therapist once a week, and began doing that as his behaviors changed. I hadn't gone to a therapist, but I thought his changing behaviors were a function of being self-centered but because you lose empathy. There's a loss of empathy. So I highly recommend anyone walking this road to seek out help. And I think there's a cultural thing that we have as Americans, that seeking help is a sign of weakness. I would suggest that it's a sign of strength. So the Facebook groups, my own personal therapist, and support groups. Not just caregiver support groups. If somebody is dealing with a spouse who has FTD, specifically FTD support groups, caregiver support groups, because it's a unique disease.
And for somebody who may be listening to this, who is entering this arena, and is feeling perhaps overwhelmed after all these things, like you were just talking about powers of attorney and setting this up and perhaps moving, and what's the piece of advice that you were going to give somebody having walked this walk? Who do you go to? Do you immediately make sure that you have a qualified elder care attorney? Do you sit down and do all the documents? Do you, what's those first 2 or 3 mandatory steps?
An elder care attorney, and get your documents written right away while he or she can still sign. Your power of attorney, your will, and your proxy, your advance directives. Those 3 documents. And especially while your spouse can still sign, is still able to put a signature to paper, is number 1. And I did work with an elder care social worker to help me navigate the system.
Right.
And but I still had to be a strong advocate. There were times when
I'm sorry. I think that's one of the things. I mean, geriatric care managers or social workers, but I think, as you alluded to, once you shut the door at night and come home, you still have to be, and this is a challenge for many caregivers, to be able to muster the internal strength, psychological strength, physical strength, to be an advocate, because once you enter the system, really you are your own best advocate, and you're the best advocate for your loved one. And unfortunately, there's no training for that. You just, I guess, have to learn how to do it. As we run out of time, one major piece of advice from Vicki to people who may be struggling in this area right now. What's that one thing?
Ask for help. Ask for help from the organizations that are available. Ask for help from others who either are or have gone through it. And those are 2 different things. I think it's good to talk to other people who are going through it, as well as people who have gone through it. With FTD, you lose your spouse twice. Once to the disease and the final ultimate loss. And being able to talk about it with others who really understand what it's like to perform those functions for your spouse that are daily functions, it is something you can't do with anyone, not with your family, not with friends. And so find other people who either are or have gone through the same thing. But bottom line, ask for help. And I'm happy to talk to anyone who is going through this or has gone through it. Now I'm in the second grieving process, and I certainly would welcome the opportunity to talk to other people who have lost their spouses specifically to FTD.
If somebody wanted to get hold of you, how do they do that?
They can reach out to me on FaceTime, or I don't know if it's appropriate to give out my phone number and email here on this venue, but they can reach me through you.
Okay.
Through your organization.
Jewish Sacred Aging, and we'll follow up. Vicki, thank you very much for sharing this journey, this unique, I would imagine, just real fast, the role of your Jewish faith. Was it sustaining you, helping you, comforting you, or just there? Easy question.
Well, with me, nothing's an easy, quick question. As a Reformed Jew, and as a person who's gone through a lot of trauma, my mother died when she was 58. My sister died when she was 34. My father was 72. I had my own breast cancer, 2 heart attacks, and what I've gone through with Harold. I find Judaism to be very wise psychologically as well as spiritually in the approach to illness and death and dying and those life-changing events. I think that religion, faith, doesn't give you answers. Rather, it gives you a framework in which to address the difficult questions. And I think Judaism has a lot of wisdom in a very pragmatic approach to life and death. That illness is not a punishment for a life ill-lived, that it's random, it happens, and it's bad things are going to happen to us. The question is, what do we do with it?
Right.
That's the choice we have. And I integrate the tragedy with the blessings of life all at the same time. I have many blessings in my life, but I also have many tragedies in my life, and they're all integrated into this person you're talking to.
Vicki Axe, thank you very much. Harold would be is very proud of you. And we thank you for your time and your caring and your willingness to share this story and bring to light FTD. And again, stay safe, stay healthy. Toda Rabbah. To all of you, I want to thank you. Toda. I want to thank you again for being with us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Remember, you can now join us and make this TV broadcast available on the Roku streaming service by visiting bit.ly/JSAROKU. You can add it to your Roku system. We welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. And again, we invite you to visit the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. We thank you for your continued support to our work. And if you'd like to make a tax-free donation, go to the website and click on the donate button. Thank you very much for that. Seekers of Meaning is produced in the broadcast center of Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out and thank you to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning. Toda, shalom, stay safe, stay healthy, everybody. Thank you.